With over 6 to 8 million Panzerfausts produced, Germany flooded the battlefields of World War II with one of the most effective anti-tank weapons ever devised. But by the war's brutal end, as these tank fists were handed out in shattered cities to just about anyone aged 16 to 60, their deployment had morphed into something far grimmer than the already nightmarish conflict. You've probably caught glimpses of this weapon in movies like Fury, but here's the full, unvarnished story, from its desperate origins to its deadly legacy. Let's rewind to the beginning, how and why this game-changer was created. Panzerfaust translates from German as armor fist or tank fist, fitting right into their flair for dramatic weapon names. It all kicked off on the Eastern Front in 1942 after Germany invaded the Soviet Union and shredded the older, lighter BT series tanks. Then came the rude awakening. The T-34 and KV-1 tanks rolled in, boasting superior armor and firepower that made most early German tanks and anti-tank gear look obsolete. These Soviet beasts were nearly invincible to Germany's standard 37mm towed anti-tank gun, which earned the demoralizing nickname door knocker for its futility. It might as well have been tapping politely on the hull. That same 37mm gun was mounted on many Panzer III tanks, designed as the main tank killers, while Panzer IVs and earlier models handled infantry and fortifications. The Germans had anticipated armor tech evolving fast when the war started, so they were already gearing up for the 50mm anti-tank gun, and soon after, the 75mm. But rolling them out in towed form or retrofitting tanks took time they didn't have. Beyond anti-tank guns, there were anti-tank rifles, cheap, mass-produced options that infantry could lug around and use effectively at close range against early war light armor. But as heavier tanks like the T-34 showed up, those rifles became dead weight. Germany also relied on magnetic anti-tank charges and mines, but these were desperate measures. A soldier had to literally scramble onto an enemy tank to plant them effectively, turning the operator into a high-risk kamikaze. What the Wehrmacht urgently needed was something affordable, portable, easy to mass-produce, and capable of giving foot soldiers a fighting chance against tanks from beyond point-blank range. It had to be lightweight enough to carry, simple to use in tight spots where bulky guns couldn't maneuver, and require minimal training. Enter the concept of a recoilless launch tube firing a shaped charge warhead, a disposable one-shot anti-tank grenade launcher. Early prototypes struggled with backblast issues and inconsistent armor penetration, but by 1943, the kinks were ironed out. The first model, the Panzerfaust 30, also called the Klein for small, hit production lines. As Soviet tank hordes grew and American Shermans poured in from the West, Germany ramped up output to arm every infantryman with at least a shot, literally, against enemy armor. Before diving into its battlefield impact, let's break down how this deceptively simple weapon worked. At its heart, it was a single-shot, recoilless launcher preloaded with a warhead. The disposable steel tube came factory-packed with a black powder propellant charge topped by the warhead. To fire, a soldier would brace the tube on their shoulder or under their arm, flip up the basic leaf sight, and squeeze the trigger bar. This ignited a primer, then the main propellant, hurling the warhead forward while venting the blast rearward to cancel recoil. The result? Virtually no kickback, but a ferocious backblast that could kill or injure anyone within about 10 meters directly behind, hence the red warning labels screaming "Danger!" Intense fire blast. Firing from enclosed spaces was a bad idea unless absolutely necessary. You'd risk burns, concussion, or worse. The warhead itself was a shaped charge explosive that, on impact, funneled its blast into a superheated metal jet capable of punching through 140 to 200 millimeters of armor, depending on the model, like a hot knife through butter. In 1943, that penetration power was revolutionary, enough to take out any Allied tank if hit from the side or rear. The catch? Its range was pitifully short, basically point-blank for the early versions, offering a decent hit chance only at around 30 meters. That beat crawling up to slap a mine on a tank, but it still demanded nerves of steel. Sights were calibrated with fixed notches for distances like 30, 60, or 80 meters, but aiming at a moving target under fire was no picnic. Weighing just 5 to 7 kilograms, though, one soldier could tote 1 or 2 easily, turning any grunt into a potential tank buster if armor got too close. This lightweight powerhouse revolutionized close-quarters anti-tank warfare, and it hit the ground running. The first batches reached German infantry on the Eastern Front around September 1943, just in time for Soviet tank offensives that were overrunning positions left and right. It quickly proved lethal against T-34s, spreading like wildfire. Great for defending trenches from advancing armor, it also spawned specialized tank hunter teams, called Panzerknacker or Panzernachkampf squads, a handful of soldiers armed with Panzerfausts who'd ambush from cover, waiting for tanks to expose flanks or rears. Riflemen provided cover fire for their getaway. It was a cost-effective equalizer. One cheap throwaway weapon could wipe out a tank that took massive resources to build, crew, and deploy. Yet, as effective as it was, being a Panzerfaust operator was anything but safe. Far from it. In the war's final stages, cheap Panzerfausts accounted for up to 70% of Soviet armor losses in urban fights, not from elite Tigers or Panthers or the famed 88mm guns, but from these handheld rockets. Combat had shifted to rubble-choked cities and narrow streets, where tanks were sitting ducks for ambushes. Allied forces scrambled to adapt, slapping on improvised defenses like sheet metal plates, logs, spare track links, sandbags, wire mesh, or even bed frame skirts, early versions of today's cope cages, to prematurely detonate the warhead away from the main armor. They learned the hard way to never send tanks into towns without heavy infantry support to sweep buildings and flush out threats before Panzerfaust teams could close in. American and British tankers in Normandy dreaded them after D-Day. The bocage hedgerows were perfect for such hit-and-run tactics, as depicted in Fury. Shermans, Churchills, and tank destroyers were all vulnerable, with estimates pegging about a third of Allied tank losses in some sectors to Panzerfausts and similar weapons. Crews lived in fear of that telltale whoosh. But let's zoom in on the human cost, the staggering casualty rates among Panzerfaust operators, which made this weapon as deadly to its users as to its targets. The high death toll stemmed from its core limitations and the desperate contexts of its use. First, the short range, often just 30 to 100 meters, forced soldiers into suicidal proximity with enemy tanks, exposing them to machine gun fire, shrapnel, or even being run over. Sneaking close enough for a clean shot meant braving open ground or urban chaos, where Allied infantry screens could spot and suppress them instantly. The vicious backblast was another killer. It not only risked injuring nearby comrades, but kicked up dust and smoke, pinpointing the shooter's position for immediate retaliation. Firing from cover was tricky. Enclosed spots amplified the blast's dangers, often forcing operators into exposed positions. As a single-shot disposable, it left the user defenseless post-fire. No quick follow-up if the shot missed, and retreating under fire was a gamble. In urban brawls like Berlin, where 70% of Soviet tank kills came from Panzerfausts, operators faced overwhelming odds. Allied artillery, air support, and coordinated infantry tank teams turned ambushes into death traps. Casualty rates were horrific, especially in late-war defensive battles. German anti-tank infantry units suffered losses exceeding 50% in major engagements like Kursk, Normandy, and Berlin, with Panzerfaust teams bearing the brunt due to their high-risk role. The weapon's simplicity meant minimal training, often just minutes, which amplified errors and fatalities among conscripts. In the end, while Panzerfausts destroyed thousands of tanks, they came at a steep price. brave but often doomed soldiers paying with their lives for every kill. The Panzerfaust evolved rapidly in range and punch, with names reflecting their effective meters. The original Panzerfaust 30 Klein had a 10-centimeter warhead and 30-meter range, enough to gut a T-34 from the side, but they craved more. Next came the Panzerfaust 30 Gross, big, with a beefed-up 15-centimeter warhead for better penetration and explosive force against heavies. By 1944, the Panzerfaust 60 dominated production, doubling the range, though the warhead stayed similar, via a beefier propellant charge for improved velocity and accuracy. Millions rolled out by 1945, proving devastating in city ambushes against Allied advances. The Panzerfaust 100 upped the ante to 100 meters with a 6-kilogram warhead piercing up to 220 millimeters of armor, capable of frontal kills on most tanks, though hitting at max range was optimistic. It saw heavy use in last-stand defenses as the Reich crumbled, arming civilians and Hitler Youth in futile bids to stall the inevitable. The Panzerfaust 150 was a redesign, a sleeker 10.5-centimeter pointed warhead with enhanced explosives for 300-millimeter penetration, a 2-stage propellant for 150-meter reach, and even a clip-on fragmentation sleeve to double as anti-infantry shrapnel. It had a 3-second self-destruct fuse for airbursts if it missed. About 100,000 were made in 1945, but Soviet advances overran the factories before widespread deployment. The planned Panzerfaust 250 aimed for reusability with a pistol grip and electric firing, echoing modern RPGs, but never materialized, as production was slated for September 1945, post-surrender. Soviet engineers eyed the designs post-war, birthing the RPG-2 in 1949, eerily similar to German prototypes. We can't overlook Germany's other anti-tank arsenal. The Panzerschreck, tank terror, was essentially a souped-up bazooka, reverse-engineered from captured American models. True to German over-engineering, it fired an 88-millimeter rocket with a 3-kilogram warhead punching 200 millimeters of armor, matching or beating the Panzerfaust. Reusable with better range and accuracy, it needed a 2-man team, gunner and loader, plus a face shield against backblast. Troops dubbed it Ofenrohr, stovepipe. Costlier and more complex than Panzerfausts, it complemented them, Panzerschrecks for squads, Panzerfausts for individuals. Then there were Teller mines, dish-shaped, 5-kilogram TNT-packed anti-tank mines buried in defensive lines or, in desperation, slapped directly onto tanks. Magnetic mines demanded even closer contact. Allies had their own counterparts, some quirky. The American bazooka, introduced in 1942, fired a 60-millimeter HEAT rocket, penetrating 75 to 100 millimeters with a 150-meter range, but needed 2 men, and early batteries flopped in cold weather, failing to ignite when it counted. Urban fights were awkward with its long tube. Still, GIs respected and scavenged Panzerfausts for bunkers, fortifications, or even infantry. The Brits' PIAT, Projector Infantry Anti-Tank, was uniquely odd, a spigot mortar lobbing a shaped charge via a massive spring with a small propellant boost for extra kick. No backblast meant safe firing from rooms without the dust clouds giving away positions. Penetration matched the bazooka, but effective range topped at 50 meters, and it weighed a hefty 32 pounds. The spring's recoil was brutal, meant to auto-recock for the next shot, in theory. In practice, it often jammed, forcing soldiers to stand the thing upright, stomp the butt, and yank the spring back manually. British troops had a love-hate thing with it. The Soviets lacked a true RPG equivalent during the war, leaning on anti-tank rifles, effective early on but fading, Molotov cocktails, and satchel charges. They eagerly used captured Panzerfausts, experimenting with their own RPG-1 too late for action. As the tide turned irreversibly, the Panzerfaust's story darkened further. In the war's dying gasps, they were doled out to the Volkssturm, People's Storm Militia, basically any able-bodied German from 16 to 60, including old men, boys, and even women. Deemed the Reich's final bulwark, they got the briefest crash course on firing these against tanks pounding at their doors. In Berlin's apocalyptic 1945 siege, some 60,000 Volkssturm fought, but casualty rates were catastrophic, up to 70 to 80% in some units, with battalions whittled from hundreds to handfuls. Overall, Volkssturm losses accounted for over half of Germany's staggering 1.23 million military deaths in the war's last 4 months. Many perished in hopeless charges, yet they still inflicted heavy tank losses on the Allies, a tragic testament to the weapon's potency amid total collapse.